The pilot pulls the trigger for exactly 2 seconds. That is all it takes. 2 seconds. In that time, the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, a weapon so large, so heavy, and so violent that it was designed first and the aircraft built around it second, fires approximately 140 rounds of depleted uranium, each one the size of a wine bottle, at a closing rate that makes the burst invisible to the naked eye. What was a tank a moment ago is now a burning monument to the most brutally honest philosophy in the history of military aviation. Don't build a fast jet that carries a gun, build the gun, then build everything else around keeping it in the air long enough to use it. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, called the Warthog by every pilot who has ever loved it and every general who has ever tried to kill it, is the ugliest, slowest, most unglamorous combat aircraft the United States Air Force has ever operated. It looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen an airplane. Its engines sit on top of the fuselage like afterthoughts. Its twin tail gives it a silhouette that resembles nothing so much as a very determined insect. It cruises at 340 miles per hour, slower than some propeller aircraft of the Second World War. And for 50 years, it has been the most feared close air support platform on Earth. So how did the most deliberately primitive combat aircraft in the U.S. inventory become the one that soldiers on the ground call for when everything else has gone wrong? The answer begins not in an engineering office, but in the killing fields of 1973. The Yom Kippur War shattered assumptions that the Pentagon had spent a decade building. When Egyptian and Syrian armor poured across Israeli lines in October of that year, the initial Israeli Air Force response, fast jets, high and fast, dropping bombs from altitude, was nearly catastrophic. Soviet-supplied anti-aircraft missiles filled the sky and destroyed Israeli aircraft at a rate that stunned every Air Force watching from a distance. Speed and altitude, it turned out, were not advantages in close air support. They were liabilities. A fast jet flying high cannot see the tank hidden under the tree line. It cannot distinguish between the burning vehicle that is already dead and the intact one that is about to kill friendly troops 50 meters away. It makes one pass, fast and committed, and if the bomb misses, the tank lives. American planners watched Israel lose aircraft at an unsustainable rate and drew one inescapable conclusion. In the next war, the war everyone in NATO was preparing for, the one that looked like a Soviet armored tide rolling through the Fulda Gap, close air support done wrong would not just fail, it would be irrelevant. And the next war looked like it would be decided by armor. 40,000 Warsaw Pact tanks, massed and moving fast, punching through NATO defensive lines before reinforcements could arrive from America. What they needed was something that could find tanks, identify them, kill them reliably, absorb the anti-aircraft fire that would inevitably saturate that environment, and come back, not at altitude, not at high speed, down in the mud, slow enough to see what it was shooting at, survivable enough to take hits and keep fighting. They needed something that had never really been built before. The design team at Fairchild Republic, working against a competing proposal from Northrop, made a decision that sounds almost deranged in the context of modern aerospace development. They started with the weapon, not the engine, not the airframe, not the avionics, the gun. The GAU-8 Avenger is 19 feet long. It weighs, with its ammunition drum fully loaded with 350 rounds, more than a Volkswagen Beetle. Its 7 rotating barrels fire at up to 3,900 rounds per minute, generating a recoil force of approximately 10,000 pounds, meaning that when firing, the gun's recoil produces more thrust than one of the aircraft's 2 engines. The gun is mounted slightly left of center in the nose so that the firing barrel sits precisely on the aircraft's centerline, ensuring that rounds go exactly where the pilot aims them, rather than drifting off axis under the torque of the rotating barrels. That detail, a single detail about barrel positioning, represents the kind of obsessive engineering precision that defines the entire machine. Everything else on the A-10 was built to keep that gun pointed at tanks. The engines, 2 General Electric TF-34 turbofans, each producing 9,065 pounds of thrust, were mounted high on the rear fuselage, away from the ground debris kicked up during low-altitude operations and separated from each other so that a single hit could not take out both simultaneously. The aircraft could fly on one engine. The cockpit was enclosed in a titanium bathtub, a self-contained armored shell weighing approximately 1,200 pounds, proof against 23mm cannon fire from below in the sides. The hydraulic flight control systems had manual backups so that the pilot could still fly the aircraft to safety even if every hydraulic line was severed by ground fire. The fuel cells were self-sealing. The landing gear was designed to absorb a wheels-up landing without destroying the aircraft. Multiple systems could be destroyed individually without the aircraft becoming uncontrollable. The designers assumed the A-10 would be hit. They built it to survive being hit and keep fighting. What did this produce in practice? On February 25, 1991, Captain Paul Johnson is flying low over the Iraqi desert when he spots a column of Republican Guard armor. He rolls in on his first pass. The gun fires its 2-second burst. That sound, that distinctive brrr-t that soldiers on the ground have called the most reassuring noise in the world. And a T-72 main battle tank, 60 tons of Soviet steel, simply ceases to function as a military asset. He pulls up, circles, finds the next vehicle, rolls in again. In a single mission, a single A-10 crew could engage dozens of targets. In Operation Desert Storm, A-10s flew 8,100 sorties and destroyed more than 900 tanks, 2,000 military vehicles, and 1,200 artillery pieces. They achieved those numbers in 43 days. No other aircraft came close. But Desert Storm was the easy version of the story. A relatively permissive air environment, clear weather, identifiable targets, coordinated operations. The harder version came a decade later in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan, where the threat was not massed armor, but an enemy that moved on foot, blended with civilian populations, hid in compounds and tree lines, and killed American soldiers from ranges close enough that a fast mover dropping a 500-pound bomb was not a solution. It was a new problem. The A-10 could loiter. That word, loiter, is the most important single capability description in the aircraft's operational history. While an F-16 burning fuel at high speed had minutes over a target before fuel forced it to turn for home, an A-10 could circle a contact area for hours, building a picture of the ground below it, communicating with the troops in contact, waiting for the precise moment when firing was safe, then rolling in with a precision that no faster aircraft could match at low altitude. Troops under fire learned to call for the Warthog not because it was the most sophisticated aircraft available, but because it was the most present. It arrived and it stayed. So why did the Air Force spend 20 years trying to retire it? The institutional answer is budget. The strategic answer is doctrine. The Air Force, since its founding as an independent service, has defined its identity around fast, sophisticated long-range air power. Bombers that cross oceans, fighters that dominate the sky, close air support, flying low and slow over someone else's ground battle to protect someone else's infantry, has never been the mission that Air Force generals built careers around. The A-10 represented a permanent argument against the institution's self-conception. It was unglamorous, irreplaceable in specific contexts, and expensive to operate in a budget where every dollar spent on Warthogs was a dollar not spent on F-35s. And every time the retirement announcement came, soldiers and Marines pushed back with a fury that stopped it. Because the A-10 carries something that cannot be quantified in a Pentagon budget presentation, it carries the sound of brrrr-t over a radio, heard by a squad pinned down in a ditch, which means, reliably, specifically, with 50 years of institutional proof, that whatever was about to kill them is about to die instead. That is what close air support actually is. Not a platform, not a capability, a promise. Which brings us back to Captain Johnson's desert and the gun that started everything. The A-10 was built backward, gun first, aircraft second, because the designers understood something that gets forgotten in the pursuit of sophistication. The purpose of the machine is not the machine. The purpose of the machine is the moment when the soldier on the ground hears that sound, takes a breath, and survives to tell someone about it. The ugliest aircraft in the inventory, the slowest, the one that looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen an airplane, the one that not because it was the best aircraft, because